ZHUANGZI is one of the most profound and enigmatic figures in Chinese philosophy. His name is forever linked with Taoism, the philosophical and spiritual tradition that emphasizes harmony with the Tao, or the natural way of the universe. While much is known about the impact of his ideas, little can be stated with certainty about the man himself. His work, the ZHUANGZI, is a literary and philosophical masterpiece that challenges conventional wisdom, presenting a unique perspective on life, knowledge, and human existence. Through parables, humor, and paradoxes, he questions the rigidity of human thought and promotes a worldview that embraces spontaneity and transformation. Despite being a central figure in Taoism, ZHUANGZI remains a mysterious and elusive character. Unlike Confucius, whose biographical details are extensively documented, or even Laozi, the legendary founder of Taoism, ZHUANGZI's life is shrouded in ambiguity. Traditional sources suggest he lived in the 4th century BCE during the Warring States period, a time of political turmoil and competing philosophical ideologies. However, most of what we know about him comes from later interpretations, making it difficult to separate historical facts from myth. ZHUANGZI's philosophy is often contrasted with that of Confucius. Whereas Confucianism promotes order, hierarchy, and social responsibility, ZHUANGZI advocates a life of spontaneity and detachment from societal constraints. He dismisses rigid moral frameworks and argues that human distinctions, such as right and wrong, good and bad, or useful and useless, are artificial constructs. His writings encourage individuals to embrace the natural flow of existence rather than force their will upon the world. This perspective makes him a radical thinker, challenging the dominant intellectual traditions of his time. One of the most intriguing aspects of ZHUANGZI's thought is his use of stories and allegories. Unlike other philosophical works that rely on direct argumentation, the ZHUANGZI conveys its messages through whimsical tales, surreal imagery, and paradoxical scenarios. These narratives often feature talking animals, transformations, and dream sequences, all of which serve to illustrate the fluid nature of reality. His famous butterfly dream parable, in which he dreams of being a butterfly and upon waking questions whether he is a man dreaming of a butterfly or a butterfly dreaming of being a man, encapsulates his skepticism toward fixed identities and absolute truths. ZHUANGZI's approach to knowledge is deeply skeptical, yet it is not nihilistic. While he questions human understanding and language's ability to capture reality, he does not argue for despair or meaninglessness. Instead, he proposes a more liberated way of living, one that is not burdened by rigid definitions or external expectations. This perspective aligns with the Taoist ideal of Wu Wei, effortless action, which teaches that true wisdom comes not from controlling the world but from flowing with it. His work invites readers to free themselves from unnecessary worries, embrace uncertainty, and find joy in the unpredictability of life. Although his influence was not immediately recognized, ZHUANGZI's philosophy left an indelible mark on Chinese intellectual history. Over time, his ideas shaped later Taoist thought and even influenced the development of Chan, Zen Buddhism. His emphasis on spontaneity, detachment, and the relativity of human perspectives resonated with Buddhist concepts of impermanence and non-attachment. Furthermore, his writings inspired scholars, poets, and thinkers across different eras, ensuring that his philosophy remained relevant beyond its original historical context. One of the reasons ZHUANGZI's work continues to captivate readers is its poetic and playful nature. Unlike the dense, formalized texts of other traditions, the ZHUANGZI is filled with humor, irony, and imaginative storytelling. His lighthearted yet profound style makes philosophical concepts accessible while simultaneously challenging the reader's assumptions. This unique approach allows his ideas to transcend cultural and temporal boundaries, appealing to a broad audience across generations. Modern interpretations of ZHUANGZI's philosophy often highlight its similarities to existentialism and postmodern thought. His rejection of fixed meanings, embrace of subjective experience, and critique of rigid structures parallel themes found in the works of Western thinkers such as Friedrich Nietzsche and Jean-Paul Sartre. However, unlike existentialists who often grapple with existential angst, Zhuangzi's outlook is more playful and celebratory. His philosophy encourages a joyous embrace of life's uncertainties rather than a struggle against them. Zhuangzi's legacy is one of profound intellectual and spiritual liberation. His writings challenge the reader to question their own assumptions, to see the world from multiple perspectives, and to recognize the limitations of human knowledge. In a world that often values certainty and control, his message serves as a refreshing reminder that life is best lived with openness, curiosity, and a willingness to adapt. Zhuangzi's philosophy did not emerge in isolation. It was shaped by the complex and turbulent world of ancient China. The Warring States period 475 to 221 BCE, during which Zhuangzi lived, was a time of great political instability, intellectual flourishing, and philosophical diversity. As various states competed for dominance, rulers sought effective strategies for governance, leading to the emergence of different schools of thought that attempted to address the challenges of the era. Confucianism, Moism, legalism, and Taoism all developed in response to these conditions, each offering distinct visions for society. Zhuangzi's work must be understood within this broader intellectual and political landscape, as his writings both engage with and reject the dominant ideas of his time. The Warring States period was marked by near-constant warfare as rival kingdoms struggled for supremacy. This relentless conflict led to widespread suffering, social disruption, and political chaos. Traditional feudal structures had collapsed, and rulers sought new ways to maintain order and consolidate power. Philosophers and strategists were frequently employed in courts, offering guidance on governance, military tactics, and ethical conduct. It was in this environment that various schools of thought, known as the 100 Schools of Thought, emerged, each attempting to provide solutions to the crises of the age. Confucianism, founded by Confucius, 551 to 479 BCE, and further developed by his followers, was one of the most influential schools of thought during this period. Confucian philosophy emphasized morality, hierarchy, and the cultivation of virtue as the foundation of a stable society. It advocated for a structured social order where individuals fulfilled their roles based on duty, tradition, and respect for authority. Confucians believed that ethical governance, guided by wise rulers and virtuous officials, was the key to restoring harmony in a fragmented world. Zhuangzi, however, was deeply skeptical of Confucianism, viewing its rigid social norms and emphasis on moral duty as artificial constraints that inhibited true freedom and spontaneity. Another influential school of thought was Moism, founded by Mozi c. 470 to 391 BCE. Mahists emphasized universal love, Jin-ai, meritocracy, and pragmatic approaches to governance. They opposed warfare and extravagance, advocating instead for simplicity and collective welfare. While Moism presented a compelling ethical framework, Zhuangzi dismissed its utilitarian logic as another form of rigid structure that imposed human ideals onto the natural order. To Zhuangzi, both Confucianism and Moism represented attempts to impose order where there should be fluidity, creating unnecessary burdens on individuals. Legalism, in contrast, took a far more pragmatic and authoritarian approach. Legalist thinkers such as Han Fizi, c. 280 to 233 BCE, argued that strict laws and harsh punishments were necessary to maintain social order. Unlike Confucians, who believed in moral leadership, legalists held that human nature was inherently selfish and needed to be controlled through a system of rewards and punishments. This philosophy greatly influenced the Qin dynasty's eventual unification of China, but stood in stark contrast to Zhuangzi's views. For Zhuangzi, legalism represented the ultimate form of unnatural coercion, stripping individuals of their freedom and forcing them into rigid, oppressive systems. It was within this intellectual and political landscape that Taoism, as articulated by Laozi and later by Zhuangzi, emerged as a counterpoint to structured ideologies. Laozi's Tao Te Ching, Tao Te Ching, introduced the foundational concepts of the Tao, the natural, spontaneous way of the universe, and Wu Wei, the idea of effortless action. While Laozi's teachings were somewhat enigmatic and focused on governance in alignment with natural principles, Zhuangzi expanded Taoist thought by emphasizing personal liberation and the relativity of human perspectives. Rather than concerning himself with statecraft, Zhuangzi explored how individuals could achieve harmony by relinquishing attachments to artificial distinctions and embracing the flow of existence. Zhuangzi's rejection of political ambition and structured ideology set him apart from his contemporaries. Whereas Confucians and legalists sought to shape society through laws, rituals, and moral teachings, Zhuangzi saw all such attempts as futile. He argued that human attempts to impose order on the world were like trying to carve a river into straight lines. It went against the natural way of things. Instead, he championed a philosophy of non-interference, spontaneity, and acceptance of change. To him, true wisdom lay not in controlling the world, but in adapting to it. In addition to philosophical diversity, the Warring States period was also an era of significant technological and cultural development. Advances in agriculture, warfare, and state administration contributed to the transformation of Chinese society. Iron tools improved farming efficiency, leading to population growth and urbanization. At the same time, military innovations, such as the use of cavalry and crossbows, intensified the scale and destruction of warfare. These changes further fueled the philosophical debates of the time, as thinkers grappled with how best to govern an increasingly complex and conflict-ridden world. Despite the turbulence of his era, Zhuangzi's philosophy offered an alternative vision of life, one that prioritized inner peace over political ambition, personal freedom over societal expectations, and harmony with nature over the pursuit of power. His rejection of conventional wisdom and insistence on embracing uncertainty made him a radical thinker, one whose ideas stood in opposition to the dominant intellectual currents of his time. While others sought to solve the chaos of the world through structured systems, Zhuangzi found wisdom in embracing the very unpredictability that others feared. Understanding the world in which Zhuangzi lived is essential to appreciating the depth of his philosophy. His thought was not merely abstract speculation. It was a response to the struggles, conflicts, and intellectual currents of his time. By rejecting the constraints of rigid ideologies, Zhuangzi provided a path to liberation that remains relevant today. His teachings remind us that true wisdom is not found in control or certainty, but in the ability to navigate the ever-changing currents of existence with an open heart and a free mind. Zhuangzi, like many ancient philosophers, remains an elusive figure in history. Unlike Confucius, whose life was extensively documented by disciples and later historians, or Laozi, whose legendary biography was carefully crafted to establish his status as the founder of Taoism, Zhuangzi's life is largely shrouded in mystery. What little is known about him comes from later sources, particularly the records of the grand historian by Sima Qian, written nearly a century after Zhuangzi's time. This lack of biographical detail has led to speculation, debate, and even myth-making about who Zhuangzi was and how he lived. According to traditional accounts, Zhuangzi, also known as ZHUANGZI, lived during the 4th century BCE in the state of Song, a relatively minor kingdom during the Warring States period. He was said to have held a minor official position at one point in his life, but he later abandoned any aspirations of political involvement. Unlike Confucius, who actively sought government reform and advised rulers, Zhuangzi rejected political life, choosing instead to live in seclusion and dedicate himself to philosophical contemplation. His disdain for political service is evident in his writings, which often mock scholars and officials who seek power and recognition. One of the most famous anecdotes about Zhuangzi, recorded in the Zhuangzi text, illustrates his rejection of political ambition. In the story, a messenger from the king of Chu arrives to offer Zhuangzi a prestigious government position. Rather than accepting, Zhuangzi responds with an allegory about a sacred turtle. He asks the messenger whether the turtle would prefer to be honored in death, enshrined in a palace, or to remain alive, dragging its tail in the mud. When the messenger answers that the turtle would surely prefer to live freely, Zhuangzi replies, "Then go away. I too prefer to drag my tail in the mud." This story encapsulates his belief that a life of freedom, however humble, is far superior to a life of status and constraint. While some scholars argue that Zhuangzi may have been a real historical figure, others suggest that his name could represent multiple contributors to the Zhuangzi text rather than a single author. The book itself is a collection of stories, dialogues, and allegories that span various topics, making it difficult to determine which parts, if any, were written by Zhuangzi himself. The presence of later editions and influences suggests that the Zhuangzi was likely expanded upon over time, similar to the way Confucian and Taoist texts were compiled and edited by followers. Despite this uncertainty, the themes and ideas attributed to Zhuangzi are consistent, reflecting a coherent philosophy of radical freedom, skepticism toward human knowledge, and an embrace of spontaneity. His writings often challenge the assumptions of other schools of thought, using humor, paradox, and irony to critique those who take their own beliefs too seriously. His playful approach to philosophy contrasts with the moral seriousness of Confucian texts and the strict pragmatism of legalist writings. Zhuangzi's philosophy does not seek to impose order, but rather to free individuals from illusions of control and certainty. Zhuangzi's rejection of conventional knowledge and structured thought is particularly evident in his discussions of language and perception. He argues that words and labels create artificial distinctions that limit human understanding. Reality, according to Zhuangzi, is fluid and ever-changing, yet people cling to fixed categories and rigid beliefs. His skepticism about knowledge challenges the authority of scholars and rulers alike, as he implies that no single perspective can claim absolute truth. This perspective made Zhuangzi unique among his contemporaries, as he did not seek to establish a new system of thought, but rather to dismantle the limitations imposed by all systems. The playful and imaginative nature of Zhuangzi's writings has led some scholars to view him not just as a philosopher, but as a literary artist. His stories are filled with surreal and fantastical elements, featuring talking animals, dreamlike transformations, and paradoxical encounters. His famous butterfly dream parable, in which he dreams of being a butterfly and upon waking questions whether he is a man dreaming of a butterfly or a butterfly dreaming of being a man, reflects his deep interest in the relativity of experience and the fluid nature of identity. Through such tales, Zhuangzi challenges readers to question their own perceptions and assumptions about reality. Zhuangzi's influence on Chinese thought extends far beyond his own time. While his ideas were not as immediately influential as those of Confucius, they became central to Taoist philosophy and later merged with Buddhist and Chan, Zen traditions. His emphasis on spontaneity, naturalness, and non-attachment resonated with later generations of thinkers who sought an alternative to rigid doctrines. The Zhuangzi text itself continued to be studied, interpreted, and reinterpreted over the centuries, influencing poets, artists, and philosophers across East Asia. One of the most striking aspects of Zhuangzi's life, or at least the stories attributed to him, is his unwavering commitment to personal freedom. Unlike other philosophers who sought to advise rulers or shape social structures, Zhuangzi appears to have lived according to his own principles, avoiding entanglement in politics and rejecting the pursuit of wealth and status. His rejection of conventional success and his embrace of a simple, wandering life serve as a testament to his philosophical convictions. Whether or not every story about him is historically accurate, they collectively paint a picture of a man who valued independence above all else. In examining Zhuangzi's life, or the myth of his life, we find not a man of grand ambitions or structured doctrines, but a thinker who delighted in dismantling rigid beliefs and embracing the spontaneity of existence. His philosophy, deeply skeptical yet profoundly liberating, continues to challenge readers to rethink their own perspectives. Whether seen as a historical figure or a symbolic representation of Taoist ideals, ZHUANGZI remains one of the most captivating minds in Chinese philosophy. The ZHUANGZI is one of the most extraordinary and influential texts in the history of Chinese philosophy. Unlike the terse, poetic style of the Tao Te Ching, which is attributed to Laozi, the ZHUANGZI is a sprawling collection of stories, parables, dialogues, and philosophical reflections that explore the nature of reality, the limits of human understanding, and the pursuit of a liberated life. Its vivid storytelling, rich humor, and deep skepticism toward conventional wisdom distinguish it from other philosophical texts of its time. While the exact authorship of the text remains uncertain, its core ideas are attributed to ZHUANGZI, and its influence has shaped Taoist, Buddhist, and even modern existential thought. The ZHUANGZI is traditionally divided into three main sections: the inner chapters, Nei Pian, the outer chapters, Wai Pian, and the miscellaneous chapters, Za Pian. The inner chapters, which consist of 7 essays, are believed to have been written by ZHUANGZI himself and form the philosophical core of the work. These chapters introduce many of the key themes of Taoism, including the relativity of human distinctions, the illusory nature of knowledge, and the importance of living in harmony with the Tao. The outer and miscellaneous chapters, by contrast, were likely composed by later Taoist thinkers and followers who expanded on ZHUANGZI's ideas. These sections include additional stories and interpretations, making the text a dynamic and evolving work rather than a single, unified doctrine. One of the defining characteristics of the ZHUANGZI is its use of allegory and paradox. Unlike Confucian texts, which often present moral principles in a straightforward manner, the ZHUANGZI conveys its lessons through dreamlike imagery, humor, and contradiction. ZHUANGZI understood that conventional logic often fails to grasp the complexity of reality, so he used playful narratives to disrupt habitual ways of thinking. This approach aligns with his larger philosophical project. Rather than presenting a rigid system of beliefs, he invites the reader to embrace uncertainty and fluidity. Among the most famous stories in the ZHUANGZI is the butterfly dream parable, in which ZHUANGZI dreams that he is a butterfly, freely fluttering through the air. Upon waking, he is left with an unsettling question. Was he a man who had dreamed of being a butterfly, or was he now a butterfly dreaming of being a man? This simple yet profound story illustrates the idea that distinctions between reality and illusion, self and other, are ultimately unstable. It challenges the reader to question their own assumptions about identity and perception, reminding us that human consciousness is shaped by ever-changing experiences. Another key passage in the ZHUANGZI is the dialogue between ZHUANGZI and Huizi, a prominent logician of the time. In one famous exchange, ZHUANGZI and Huizi stand by a river, watching the fish swim. ZHUANGZI comments on how happy the fish seem, to which Huizi retorts, "You are not a fish. How do you know what makes them happy?" ZHUANGZI replies, "You are not me. How do you know that I do not know what makes them happy?" This playful argument highlights ZHUANGZI's skepticism toward rigid definitions of knowledge. It suggests that understanding is not merely a matter of objective reasoning, but also of intuitive connection with the world. A central theme of the ZHUANGZI is the concept of wu wei, or effortless action. ZHUANGZI frequently mocks those who struggle against the natural flow of life, arguing that true wisdom lies in adapting to circumstances rather than resisting them. Many of his stories feature characters who find happiness and fulfillment not by striving for power or knowledge, but by surrendering to spontaneity. This idea is illustrated in the parable of the useless tree, in which a giant, gnarled tree is spared from being cut down because its wood is deemed worthless. While other trees are chopped down for their utility, the useless tree thrives, symbolizing the paradoxical value of being without ambition. ZHUANGZI also critiques the artificiality of human distinctions, arguing that concepts such as right and wrong, good and bad, or life and death are ultimately relative. In one story, a man named Lizzie encounters an old man who has perfected the art of swimming in a dangerous river. When asked how he manages to survive, The old man explains that he does not resist the water, but moves with its currents, blending his own movements with the natural flow. This metaphor encapsulates one of ZHUANGZI's most profound insights. Human beings suffer when they try to impose rigid control over their lives, but they find harmony when they align themselves with the rhythms of nature. The ZHUANGZI also challenges the authority of Confucian ethics and societal conventions. Whereas Confucianism emphasizes rituals, hierarchy, and moral duties, ZHUANGZI ridicules such structures as artificial constraints that prevent people from experiencing true freedom. One of his stories tells of a butcher who, despite performing a seemingly mundane task, moves with extraordinary grace and skill because he follows the natural lines of the animal's body rather than forcing his knife against resistance. This story serves as an allegory for ZHUANGZI's broader philosophy. Those who move in accordance with the Tao, rather than imposing their will upon the world, experience effortless mastery. Despite its skepticism toward structured knowledge, the ZHUANGZI does not advocate for ignorance or nihilism. Rather, it encourages an alternative way of engaging with the world, one that is flexible, open, and attuned to change. ZHUANGZI does not argue that all beliefs are meaningless. Instead, he invites the reader to recognize the limitations of human concepts and to embrace a broader, more fluid perspective. His philosophy does not demand that people abandon all action, but rather that they act in accordance with the natural flow of life rather than struggling against it. The legacy of the ZHUANGZI extends far beyond its historical context. Over the centuries, its ideas have influenced Taoist hermits, Zen Buddhist monks, poets, and artists who have sought to embody its teachings in their lives and creative expressions. Even in modern times, the ZHUANGZI continues to resonate with those who question rigid ideologies and seek a deeper sense of freedom. Its message, that wisdom comes not from control, but from surrendering to the ever-changing nature of existence, remains as relevant today as it was over 2,000 years ago. The ZHUANGZI is not merely a collection of amusing anecdotes and paradoxical dialogues. It is a profound philosophical text that challenges fundamental assumptions about knowledge, identity, and human existence. At its core, the work presents a radical vision of freedom, one that transcends the boundaries of conventional morality, logic, and social structures. ZHUANGZI's philosophy encourages an intuitive and spontaneous way of living, one that aligns with the natural rhythms of the Tao rather than human-made constraints. This chapter explores the major themes of the ZHUANGZI, including the relativity of distinctions, the limitations of knowledge, the nature of freedom, and the importance of spontaneity, Ziran. One of the most striking themes of the ZHUANGZI is the relativity of human distinctions. Throughout the text, ZHUANGZI consistently questions the validity of fixed categories such as good and evil, right and wrong, and even life and death. His famous butterfly dream parable illustrates this idea. If he cannot distinguish whether he is ZHUANGZI dreaming of being a butterfly or a butterfly dreaming of being ZHUANGZI, then how can anyone be certain of the absolute reality of their experiences? This skepticism toward rigid distinctions challenges traditional Confucian and legalist thought, which sought to define strict moral and social hierarchies. Instead, ZHUANGZI argues that distinctions are products of human perception rather than objective truths. This idea is further explored in the concept of Qi Wu, or the equalization of things. ZHUANGZI suggests that all things are interconnected and that distinctions arise only from limited perspectives. In one passage, he compares the different cries of birds and animals, suggesting that what humans call speech is merely another form of natural expression. If human language is simply one variation among many, then the truths it constructs are not necessarily superior to other forms of understanding. By dissolving rigid distinctions, ZHUANGZI invites readers to adopt a broader, more fluid perspective on reality, one that is not constrained by artificial categories. Another central theme of the ZHUANGZI is the limitations of human knowledge. Unlike Confucians, who believe that education and moral cultivation lead to wisdom, ZHUANGZI argues that the human intellect is inherently limited and that true understanding often comes from unlearning rather than accumulating knowledge. In one story, ZHUANGZI tells of a frog living in a well who believes his tiny world is the entirety of reality. When a sea turtle describes the vastness of the ocean, the frog is unable to comprehend such a concept because his experience is confined to the well. This parable serves as a metaphor for human understanding. People tend to see the world through the narrow lens of their own experiences, failing to grasp the broader and ever-changing reality beyond their limited perspectives. Because knowledge is always partial and conditioned by perspective, ZHUANGZI warns against the arrogance of scholars and philosophers who claim to possess absolute truth. He mocks the debates of the logicians, who engaged in complex arguments about definitions and categories, suggesting that their obsession with words blinds them to the actual experience of life. Instead of relying on rigid knowledge, ZHUANGZI advocates for a kind of wisdom that embraces uncertainty and is open to multiple viewpoints. This approach is not anti-intellectual, but rather deeply skeptical of the idea that rational analysis alone can lead to ultimate truth. ZHUANGZI's philosophy also presents a unique vision of freedom, one that is not based on external conditions, but on an internal state of detachment and spontaneity. He contrasts two kinds of freedom: conventional freedom, which depends on wealth, status, or social power, and true freedom, which comes from an unburdened mind. His rejection of political ambition, as seen in his response to the King of Chu's offer of high office, reflects his belief that genuine liberation cannot be found in external achievements. Instead, ZHUANGZI promotes a freedom that arises when one abandons artificial attachments and lives in accordance with the Tao. This notion of freedom is closely linked to the idea of Wu Wei, or effortless action. ZHUANGZI criticizes those who struggle to impose their will upon the world, arguing that true mastery comes from aligning oneself with the natural flow of things. He illustrates this concept in the story of a skilled butcher who effortlessly carves an ox, not by force, but by intuitively following the natural lines of the animal's body. This serves as a metaphor for how one should approach life, not through forceful effort, but through effortless harmony with the way things already are. When people cease struggling against the natural order, they find themselves moving with life rather than against it. ZHUANGZI's skepticism extends to social norms and conventions, which he sees as artificial constructs that constrain the human spirit. He frequently uses satire to mock Confucian scholars and government officials, portraying them as individuals trapped by their own seriousness and rigidity. In contrast, his ideal figures are often eccentric, wandering sages who live outside the constraints of conventional society. These characters, such as the hunchback fisherman or the crippled wanderer, may appear useless or absurd by societal standards, yet they embody a kind of freedom that others lack. By embracing their unconventional existence, they avoid the suffering that comes from striving to meet artificial expectations. A key consequence of ZHUANGZI's philosophy is the acceptance of change and impermanence. Unlike Confucians, who emphasize stability and tradition, ZHUANGZI sees transformation as a fundamental aspect of life. He describes the natural cycles of birth and death as part of a larger, cosmic process, suggesting that fear of change arises only because people cling to fixed identities. In one story, a man mourns the death of his wife, but another sage laughs, pointing out that life and death are merely different phases of the same process, like the changing of the seasons. This perspective does not encourage cold indifference, but rather a deep acceptance of the ever-changing nature of existence. ZHUANGZI's thought ultimately leads to the principle of ZHUANGZI, or spontaneity. He encourages people to live in a way that is natural, unforced, and free from rigid expectations. This does not mean acting recklessly, but rather cultivating an intuitive way of being that responds to circumstances without unnecessary resistance. His stories often depict characters who find joy in simple, unstructured lives, whether they are drifting on a boat, wandering through mountains, or playing freely like children. This ideal of spontaneous living contrasts sharply with the Confucian model of self-discipline and social responsibility, emphasizing personal authenticity over external duty. In essence, the ZHUANGZI presents a philosophy that is deeply skeptical of rigid beliefs, hierarchical structures, and human pretensions to knowledge. It offers instead a vision of life that is fluid, humorous, and free, one in which true wisdom comes not from grasping its certainty, but from letting go of illusions. Its playful tone and paradoxical nature invite the reader not to passively accept its teachings, but to engage with them creatively, questioning and reinterpreting their meaning. ZHUANGZI's philosophy did not remain confined to his lifetime or his immediate intellectual circle. His ideas had a profound and lasting impact on the development of Taoism, particularly in shaping its later religious forms. Moreover, his thought resonated deeply with Chinese Buddhism, especially in the emergence of Chan, Zen, Buddhism, and even found echoes in Western existentialism and contemporary philosophical discourse. His emphasis on spontaneity, the relativity of distinctions, and the limits of human knowledge made his work a source of inspiration for a wide range of intellectual and spiritual traditions. The earliest and most direct influence of ZHUANGZI's thought can be seen in Taoism's evolution from a philosophical tradition to an organized religious system. While Laozi's Tao Te Ching laid the foundational principles of Taoism, it was ZHUANGZI's writings that expanded and deepened its philosophical scope. Early Taoists who followed ZHUANGZI's teachings adopted his views on Wu Wei, effortless action, Ziren, natural spontaneity, and the rejection of rigid social conventions. These ideas eventually shaped the practices of Taoist hermits and sages who sought to live in harmony with nature, withdrawing from political and social obligations in pursuit of a more liberated existence. During the Han Dynasty, 206 BCE, 220 CE, Taoism began to take on religious elements, incorporating rituals, alchemical practices, and mystical beliefs. While some aspects of this transformation diverged from ZHUANGZI's more skeptical and philosophical approach, his core ideas persisted. The notion of immortality, a key theme in religious Taoism, was in part influenced by ZHUANGZI's reflections on transformation and the acceptance of life's natural cycles. Rather than seeking literal immortality, as some Taoist sects later pursued, ZHUANGZI emphasized psychological and spiritual liberation, an idea that subtly influenced Taoist meditation practices aimed at achieving harmony with the Tao. ZHUANGZI's ideas also played a crucial role in shaping Chinese Buddhism, particularly in the development of Chan, Zen, Buddhism. When Buddhism arrived in China from India, it encountered a rich philosophical landscape shaped by Confucianism and Taoism. Among the many Taoist influences on Buddhism, ZHUANGZI's thought was particularly significant in its skepticism toward rigid conceptual thinking and its embrace of direct, intuitive experience. The Chan school, which emerged during the Tang Dynasty, 618 to 907 CE, adopted many of ZHUANGZI's methods, including the use of paradox, humor, and unorthodox teaching techniques to disrupt logical reasoning and encourage enlightenment. One of the most notable parallels between ZHUANGZI's philosophy and Chan Buddhism is the rejection of dualistic thinking. Just as ZHUANGZI questioned distinctions such as right and wrong, life and death, or self and other, Chan Buddhism challenged a separation between nirvana and samsara, teacher and student, enlightenment and ignorance. The famous Chan practice of gongin, koans, paradoxical riddles meant to transcend rational thought, bears a striking resemblance to the stories found in the ZHUANGZI. Both traditions use absurdity and contradiction to shake individuals out of habitual patterns of thinking, leading to a direct experience of reality unmediated by conceptual frameworks. ZHUANGZI's influence was not limited to Taoism and Buddhism. His ideas also resonated with later Chinese thinkers who sought alternatives to rigid orthodoxy. Neo-Taoist philosophers of the Six Dynasties period, 220 to 589 CE, drew upon the ZHUANGZI to challenge Confucian authority, emphasizing personal freedom and the rejection of societal constraints. His thought also influenced poets and artists, particularly during the Tang and Song dynasties, when Taoist aesthetics flourished in Chinese landscape, painting, and poetry. The notion of embracing the useless, or finding beauty in simplicity, core themes in Zhuangzi's work, shaped artistic movements that sought to express the spontaneity of nature. Beyond China, Zhuangzi's ideas have found unexpected resonance in Western philosophy, particularly in existentialist and postmodern thought. His skepticism toward absolute truth and fixed identity aligns with existentialist themes found in the works of Friedrich Nietzsche, Jean-Paul Sartre, and Martin Heidegger. Like Zhuangzi, these thinkers question the stability of human identity, emphasizing the fluid and constructed nature of selfhood. Furthermore, his use of humor and paradox to challenge conventional wisdom parallels the deconstructive strategies employed by postmodern philosophers such as Jacques Derrida, who argued that meaning is never fixed but always shifting. Zhuangzi's emphasis on non-attachment and embracing uncertainty also has contemporary applications in psychology and mindfulness practices. Modern approaches to well-being, such as acceptance and commitment therapy, ACT, and Zen-inspired mindfulness techniques, echo Zhuangzi's insights into the dangers of clinging to rigid narratives about oneself. His philosophy suggests that suffering often arises from attachment to artificial distinctions, and that true freedom is found in letting go of the need for control. This perspective aligns with modern psychological research, which emphasizes the benefits of embracing uncertainty and cultivating an open, adaptive mindset. Despite his profound influence, Zhuangzi remains a somewhat enigmatic figure, and interpretations of his work continue to evolve. Some view him as a mystical sage advocating a life of quiet retreat, while others see him as a radical skeptic who sought to dismantle all fixed ideologies. Still others interpret his writings as a form of playful, poetic engagement with the absurdities of human existence. The richness of his thought ensures that no single reading can fully capture the depth of his philosophy. Instead, his work remains a living text, inviting each generation to discover its own meanings within its pages. In examining Zhuangzi's impact across various traditions, it becomes clear that his philosophy is not confined to any one culture, religion, or historical period. His emphasis on spontaneity, humor, and the dissolution of rigid distinctions continues to inspire those who seek a freer, more open way of engaging with life. Whether through Taoist sages, Zen monks, modern existentialists, or contemporary mindfulness practitioners, his ideas persist as a source of insight and transformation. One of the most distinctive aspects of Zhuangzi is its use of humor, playfulness, and paradox to convey deep philosophical insights. Unlike the serious and structured moral teachings of Confucianism, Zhuangzi's work often takes on a lighthearted, irreverent tone, using satire, irony, and absurdity to challenge rigid ways of thinking. His stories feature talking animals, wandering sages, and unexpected reversals of logic that unsettle the reader's assumptions. This chapter explores how humor and playfulness function in the Zhuangzi, revealing their role not just as stylistic elements, but as essential tools for philosophical exploration. One of Zhuangzi's most famous uses of humor is his satirical critique of scholars, bureaucrats, and those who take themselves too seriously. He often portrays Confucian scholars as pedantic, self-important figures who obsess over rules and rituals without grasping the deeper nature of life. In one passage, Zhuangzi describes a man who spends years meticulously carving a ceremonial bell stand, believing it to be a great achievement, only for a wandering sage to dismiss it as meaningless. This story humorously exposes the folly of excessive effort and attachment to rigid standards, reinforcing Zhuangzi's advocacy for effortless spontaneity, wu wei. Satire in the Zhuangzi is not limited to Confucian scholars. It also targets those who seek power and status. In one well-known parable, a turtle is offered the honor of being placed in a grand ancestral temple, but it refuses, preferring to remain alive and free, dragging its tail in the mud. This humorous anecdote underscores Zhuangzi's deep skepticism toward political ambition, illustrating his belief that true contentment lies in natural, unstructured living rather than in hierarchical recognition. By framing his critique in the form of an amusing fable, he makes his philosophy accessible and memorable. A key feature of Zhuangzi's humor is its embrace of paradox. He delights in stories that defy logic, forcing readers to question their assumptions. One of the most famous examples is the butterfly dream, in which Zhuangzi dreams that he is a butterfly, but upon waking, is unsure whether he is Zhuangzi who dreamed he was a butterfly or a butterfly dreaming he is Zhuangzi. This playful paradox disrupts conventional notions of reality and identity, inviting readers to reconsider the fixed boundaries between self and other, dream and wakefulness, illusion and truth. Another striking example of Zhuangzi's use of paradox is found in his discussion of Wu Wei, effortless action. He describes a skilled butcher who carves an ox with such ease that his blade never dulls. Instead of relying on brute force or calculated precision, the butcher follows the natural structure of the ox, allowing his movements to be guided effortlessly. This seemingly simple story carries a profound lesson. True mastery comes not from control and exertion, but from flowing with the nature of things. The humor lies in the unexpected wisdom of an ordinary butcher, turning conventional notions of expertise upside down. Zhuangzi also employs absurdity to highlight the limitations of human logic. In one passage, he describes a giant fish that transforms into an equally giant bird, soaring thousands of miles through the sky. This bizarre image serves not just as an entertaining tale, but as a metaphor for the vastness of the Tao and the relativity of perspective. What seems impossible from one viewpoint may be perfectly natural from another. By presenting such exaggerated scenarios, Zhuangzi playfully undermines rigid, human-centered views of reality. Beyond storytelling, Zhuangzi's humor extends to his rhetorical techniques. He frequently mimics and exaggerates the language of other philosophical schools, exposing their inconsistencies. For example, he imitates the logical debates of the Mahists and logicians, pushing their arguments to absurd extremes until they collapse under their own weight. This method of intellectual playfulness, similar to the Socratic irony found in Western philosophy, allows Zhuangzi to deconstruct rigid systems of thought without directly attacking them. Instead of arguing for a fixed alternative, he encourages an open-ended, fluid approach to wisdom. Another dimension of playfulness in the Zhuangzi is its celebration of the so-called useless. Many of his stories focus on individuals or objects that society deems worthless, yet these characters often possess a hidden wisdom or unexpected advantage. In one well-known parable, a twisted, gnarled tree is ignored by carpenters because it is unsuitable for making furniture. However, precisely because it is useless, the tree is left alone to grow freely and live a long life. This humorous inversion of values challenges conventional ideas about usefulness, suggesting that what is deemed useless by societal standards may actually lead to a more fulfilling and unburdened existence. Zhuangzi's humor serves a deeper purpose than mere entertainment. It is a philosophical strategy that liberates the mind from rigid attachments. By laughing at human pretensions, he invites his readers to step outside their habitual patterns of thought and see the world with fresh eyes. His playful style prevents his teachings from becoming dogma, ensuring that they remain open to interpretation and personal insight. In this way, his humor is itself an embodiment of Taoist philosophy, fluid, spontaneous, and resistant to fixed definitions. Zhuangzi's use of humor and playfulness is not just a literary device, but an essential aspect of his philosophy. Through satire, paradox, absurdity, and irony, he deconstructs rigid ideas, encourages spontaneity, and reveals the limitations of human knowledge. His unique style makes profound ideas accessible and invites readers to engage with philosophy in an open, dynamic way. By laughing at the absurdities of life, Zhuangzi shows that wisdom does not come from taking things too seriously, but from embracing the fluid, ever-changing nature of existence. Zhuangzi's philosophy is deeply rooted in an appreciation of nature and the spontaneous processes of the cosmos. Unlike Confucianism, which emphasizes human-centered morality and social order, or legalism, which focuses on strict governance, ZHUANGZI presents a vision of life that dissolves the boundary between human beings and the natural world. His writings suggest that true wisdom comes not from imposing human will upon nature, but from aligning oneself with its effortless flow. In this chapter, we will explore how ZHUANGZI conceptualizes nature and the cosmos, analyzing his ideas in relation to Taoist thought, ecological philosophy, and contemporary discussions on environmental harmony. At the core of ZHUANGZI's philosophy is the belief that the Tao is the fundamental principle governing all existence. Unlike the anthropomorphic deities of many religious traditions, the Tao is not a conscious entity, but an all-pervading force that moves spontaneously and without intention. Nature, in ZHUANGZI's view, is the most authentic manifestation of the Tao because it follows its course effortlessly, without artificial interference. Mountains rise, rivers flow, seasons change, and creatures live and die in accordance with their inherent nature. For ZHUANGZI, wisdom consists in recognizing this dynamic interplay and adapting to it, rather than attempting to resist or control it. One of the most striking metaphors ZHUANGZI uses to describe nature's spontaneous order is the story of the great fish Kuan, which transforms into the enormous bird Peng. This bird soars across the heavens, carried effortlessly by the wind, needing no conscious effort to sustain its flight. This image illustrates the idea that true power comes from going along with natural forces rather than opposing them. The bird's flight is not a product of willpower, but of surrender to the greater currents of the cosmos. In contrast, human beings, in their obsession with control and order, often work against nature, creating suffering for themselves and others. ZHUANGZI frequently criticizes the artificiality of human civilization, which he sees as a source of unnecessary struggle. He contrasts the spontaneous, harmonious existence of nature with the rigid, hierarchical structures of society. One of his famous parables involves a tree that is considered useless because its wood is too twisted to be turned into furniture. However, because it has no practical value to humans, the tree is left alone to grow freely, untouched by the axe. This story highlights ZHUANGZI's belief that so-called uselessness can be a form of freedom, and that human concepts of value and productivity often run counter to nature's effortless way. For ZHUANGZI, nature embodies the principle of Wu Wei, effortless action, which he sees as the highest form of wisdom. Unlike Confucian ideals of deliberate moral cultivation, Wu Wei encourages non-coercive action that aligns with the natural flow of things. ZHUANGZI illustrates this principle through the story of the butcher who carves an ox with such skill that his blade never dulls. Instead of forcefully cutting through bones, he follows the natural spaces between them, moving with the ox's anatomy rather than against it. This lesson applies not only to craftsmanship, but to all aspects of life. When we stop forcing things and learn to move with the rhythms of nature, life becomes effortless and fulfilling. ZHUANGZI's reverence for nature also extends to his perspective on life and death. Unlike Confucianism, which emphasizes rituals and mourning, or Buddhism, which seeks liberation from suffering, ZHUANGZI treats death as a natural transition. In one of his famous anecdotes, when ZHUANGZI's wife dies, his friend Huizi finds him singing and playing a drum instead of mourning. When asked why, ZHUANGZI explains that life and death are merely phases in the endless transformation of the cosmos. Just as the seasons change, so too do living beings, and clinging to life or fearing death is a misunderstanding of nature's way. This view challenges deeply ingrained human fears and invites a perspective of acceptance and harmony with the larger cosmic process. ZHUANGZI's ideas about nature anticipate modern ecological perspectives that emphasize the interconnectedness of all living things. His philosophy rejects the idea that humans are separate from or superior to nature, an assumption that has led to environmental destruction in many industrial societies. Instead, he suggests that wisdom lies in understanding ourselves as part of a larger, organic whole. This perspective aligns with contemporary ecological principles, such as deep ecology, which calls for a shift away from human-centered thinking toward an appreciation of the intrinsic value of all life forms. His insights also resonate with modern discussions on sustainability. In many of his parables, ZHUANGZI critiques the way human beings exploit nature for short-term gains, only to suffer the consequences later. His warnings about the dangers of over-interference in natural processes can be seen as an early form of environmental philosophy, cautioning against excessive control and advocating for a more balanced, respectful relationship with the Earth. Today, as climate change and ecological crises threaten the planet, ZHUANGZI's teachings offer a valuable reminder of the need to live in accordance with nature rather than against it. Another key theme in ZHUANGZI's writings is the idea that nature does not judge or discriminate. It simply is. Unlike human society, which imposes rigid categories of right and wrong, success and failure, beauty and ugliness, nature embraces all things equally. A crooked tree is no less valuable than a straight one, and a wildflower is no less perfect than a cultivated garden plant. This perspective encourages a shift away from narrow, human-centered judgments toward a broader appreciation of the world as it is. It suggests that by letting go of artificial distinctions, we can experience life more fully and harmoniously. ZHUANGZI's vision of nature and the cosmos presents a profound alternative to human-centered ways of thinking. His philosophy encourages us to move beyond rigid control, embrace spontaneity, and recognize our deep interconnection with the natural world. His insights remain highly relevant today, offering wisdom for both personal fulfillment and ecological awareness. By aligning ourselves with nature's effortless rhythms, we can cultivate a way of being that is more fluid, free, and in harmony with the great unfolding of the Tao. ZHUANGZI's philosophy has had a profound impact on Chinese art and literature, shaping the way poets, painters, and storytellers have expressed their visions of the world. His emphasis on spontaneity, transformation, and the illusory nature of reality inspired generations of artists who sought to capture the fleeting, dynamic essence of existence. Through metaphor, symbolism, and aesthetic expression, ZHUANGZI's ideas found a natural home in artistic traditions that value intuition, improvisation, and harmony with the Tao. This chapter explores how his thought influenced various forms of creative expression, from classical Chinese poetry and landscape painting to modern literature and philosophy. One of the most significant ways in which ZHUANGZI's philosophy influenced art is through the Taoist concept of Zhiren, or natural spontaneity. Traditional Chinese painters, particularly those of the literati school, sought to embody this principle in their work. Instead of striving for hyper-realistic detail, they aim to capture the spirit of a landscape, often through free-flowing brushstrokes that mirror the effortless movements found in nature. The famous Song Dynasty painter Wuxi, for example, created vast mountain scenes that conveyed a sense of boundless space and impermanence, reflecting ZHUANGZI's vision of the world as ever-changing and interconnected. Calligraphy, another major Chinese art form, also reflects ZHUANGZI's philosophy. In Taoist-inspired calligraphy, the emphasis is not on rigid technique, but on fluid, spontaneous movement. Master calligraphers often describe their art as a form of meditation, where the brush moves in harmony with the Tao. Just as ZHUANGZI taught that one should not force action, but let it arise naturally, calligraphers allow the brush to flow freely, embodying the principles of Wu Wei, effortless action. The best calligraphy pieces are those that seem to arise organically, much like ZHUANGZI's stories, which unfold without strict logical structures, but instead flow like a dream. ZHUANGZI's influence is also deeply embedded in Chinese poetry, particularly in the works of poets from the Tang and Song dynasties. One of the most famous poets to draw inspiration from him was Li Bai, whose verses often celebrate freedom, wandering, and detachment from worldly concerns. In poems like Drinking Alone with the Moon, Li Bai evokes a dreamlike quality reminiscent of ZHUANGZI's butterfly dream, blurring the line between self and cosmos. illusion, and reality. His playful, sometimes drunken persona reflects Zhuangzi's ideal of the carefree sage who refuses to be burdened by societal constraints. The theme of transformation, so central to the ZHUANGZI, is another aspect that deeply influenced literature. Many classical Chinese stories and folk tales incorporate ideas of metamorphosis, where humans turn into animals, spirits shift between forms, or reality itself dissolves into dreamlike states. This can be seen in Strange Tales from a Chinese Studio, a collection of supernatural stories by Pu Songling, where characters frequently cross the boundaries between worlds. These stories reflect the Taoist idea that fixed identities are an illusion, reinforcing Zhuangzi's belief that life is a continuous, unpredictable transformation. Beyond China, Zhuangzi's ideas also found their way into Japanese and Western artistic traditions. The Japanese Zen tradition, which absorbed many Taoist principles, incorporated his themes of spontaneity and paradox into its poetry and painting. Haiku poets, such as Matsuo Basho, reflected Zhuangzi's appreciation for nature's simple, fleeting beauty, often depicting moments of sudden insight through minimal, suggestive imagery. Similarly, the Zen art of ink painting, with its emphasis on empty space and spontaneous brushwork, aligns closely with the aesthetic ideals found in the Zhuangzi. In modern literature, Zhuangzi's thought resonates with writers and philosophers who explore themes of existential uncertainty and non-duality. The French writer and philosopher Albert Camus, though rooted in existentialism, shares with Zhuangzi a rejection of rigid meaning and a deep awareness of life's absurdity. Likewise, the Argentine writer Jorge Luis Borges often played with paradoxes of identity, time, and reality in ways that echo Zhuangzi's storytelling techniques. His short stories, such as The Circular Ruins and The Garden of Forking Paths, reflect a similar fascination with the fluid nature of existence and the limitations of human perception. Zhuangzi's philosophical style, marked by humor, paradox, and self-reflection, also influenced modern Chinese literature. Writers such as Lu Sun, one of China's most important 20th century authors, engage with Zhuangzi's themes to critique rigid ideologies and encourage intellectual freedom. In his essay, What Happens After Nora Leaves, Lu Sun uses a ZHUANGZian perspective to question societal expectations and argue for personal liberation. Similarly, contemporary Chinese poets and novelists continue to draw on Zhuangzi's themes to explore the tension between individual spontaneity and societal constraints. Another important aspect of Zhuangzi's influence on art is the idea that beauty lies in imperfection and incompleteness. This principle is evident in the Taoist appreciation for asymmetry and roughness, which contrasts with Confucian ideals of order and refinement. In Japanese aesthetics, this concept evolved into wabi-sabi, a worldview that finds beauty in the transient, the aged, and the imperfect. The rustic simplicity of a cracked teacup or the worn surface of an ancient stone path reflects the same insight that Zhuangzi expressed through his tales of useless trees and carefree wanderers. That true value lies not in rigid perfection, but in natural authenticity. Zhuangzi's thought has left a lasting imprint on artistic and literary traditions across cultures. His ideas of spontaneity, transformation, and non-attachment have shaped poetry, painting, calligraphy, and storytelling, inspiring countless creative minds to embrace the fluid, unpredictable nature of life. By dissolving rigid boundaries between self and world, reality and illusion, his philosophy continues to encourage artistic exploration and innovation. Zhuangzi's philosophy, though originating over 2,000 years ago, continues to resonate in the modern world. His ideas, which challenge rigid thinking, emphasize spontaneity, transformation, and harmony with nature, have found relevance not only in Chinese culture, but across various global traditions. As we reflect on Zhuangzi's legacy, it becomes clear that his teachings offer profound insights into how we might live more freely, authentically, and harmoniously in a world often dominated by control, materialism, and rigid structures. This final chapter explores the enduring relevance of Zhuangzi's thought examining how his ideas continue to influence contemporary philosophy, spirituality, and even environmentalism. In many ways, Zhuangzi's critique of rigid systems mirrors modern concerns about the limitations of traditional worldviews. In an era where societal expectations, professional ambitions, and consumerism dominate, Zhuangzi's rejection of these external pressures offers a refreshing alternative. His philosophy encourages individuals to release the constant striving for success and achievement that often leads to stress, anxiety, and disillusionment. Instead, Zhuangzi teaches the value of spontaneity, of living in alignment with one's true nature and the natural rhythms of the world. This wisdom aligns with contemporary movements that advocate for mindfulness, minimalism, and mental health awareness, all of which emphasize a return to simplicity and an acceptance of life's inherent uncertainty. One of Zhuangzi's central teachings, the idea of wu wei, effortless action, holds particular relevance in today's world, where overwork and burnout are widespread. In contrast to the modern ethic of constant striving and productivity, Zhuangzi's philosophy suggests that there is wisdom in taking a step back, letting go of excessive control, and allowing things to unfold naturally. By practicing wu wei, individuals can experience greater peace of mind and a deeper connection with the world around them. This concept has found resonance in modern mindfulness practices, particularly in the West, where meditation and yoga focus on the idea of letting go of control and embracing the present moment. The ability to flow with life's changes, rather than constantly fighting against them, can lead to a more balanced, harmonious existence. Zhuangzi's vision of transformation also speaks powerfully to contemporary concerns with personal growth and self-improvement. In his teachings, transformation is not a forced or linear process, but a natural unfolding that occurs when we let go of rigid self-conceptions. Modern self-help literature often encourages individuals to overcome limitations and transform their lives through willpower and discipline. Zhuangzi, however, suggests that true transformation arises from attuning oneself to the changing nature of life and allowing one's identity to flow with it. His stories, in which characters undergo shifts of form and perspective, echo the contemporary interest in embracing fluidity and impermanence as part of personal development. Rather than seeing transformation as a goal to be achieved, Zhuangzi's teachings encourage us to see it as a process that is already happening, one that we can participate in by being present and open to the moment. In the realm of spirituality, Zhuangzi's teachings challenge conventional religious structures by emphasizing direct experience over doctrinal belief. His skepticism toward rigid belief systems and religious dogma echoes the modern spiritual but not religious movement, which seeks meaning outside of traditional institutions. Zhuangzi's embrace of the Tao as an ineffable, ever-changing force resonates with contemporary spiritual seekers who are less interested in formalized rituals and more concerned with cultivating a personal connection to the divine or the cosmos. In this way, Zhuangzi can be seen as a precursor to more fluid, non-dogmatic forms of spirituality that prioritize personal experience and inner harmony over external structure. Zhuangzi's philosophical skepticism also encourages critical reflection on the nature of knowledge and certainty. In a world where access to information is abundant, but often conflicting, Zhuangzi's rejection of fixed truths offers a valuable lesson. His stories question the very nature of reality, suggesting that our perceptions are limited and subject to change. This aligns with postmodern thought, which challenges the idea of objective truth and emphasizes the fluidity of interpretation. Zhuangzi's parables, with their emphasis on paradox and uncertainty, encourage us to remain open to multiple perspectives and to recognize the limitations of our own understanding. This intellectual humility is particularly relevant in an age of polarization, where the ability to entertain multiple viewpoints and engage in open dialogue is increasingly necessary for social cohesion. Zhuangzi's emphasis on nature as the embodiment of the Tao also resonates strongly with contemporary environmental movements. In an era of climate change, environmental degradation, and ecological collapse. Zhuangzi's respect for the natural world offers a vital ethical framework for rethinking human interaction with the Earth. His belief that humans should live in accordance with the natural flow of the universe, rather than attempting to dominate it, offers a powerful critique of modern industrial practices. Zhuangzi's philosophy encourages a shift away from the exploitation of nature for economic gain, advocating instead for a more harmonious and sustainable relationship with the planet. This resonates with modern ecological movements such as deep ecology, which posits that all life has intrinsic value and that humans must live in balance with the Earth. Zhuangzi's influence also extends into the realm of art and creativity, where his ideas about spontaneity, transformation, and non-attachment have inspired countless artists and writers. The fluidity and openness of his storytelling style, as well as his playful approach to paradox, have influenced both traditional Chinese art forms and contemporary avant-garde movements. In the West, Zhuangzi's emphasis on the ephemeral and illusory nature of existence has found resonance in modern art, which often seeks to convey the subjective, fleeting experience of life. His philosophical approach to creativity, rooted in openness, improvisation, and the rejection of fixed rules, continues to inspire artists who seek to express the fluid, dynamic nature of existence in their work. In conclusion, Zhuangzi's legacy is vast and multifaceted, extending far beyond the philosophical texts in which he expressed his ideas. His teachings continue to inspire contemporary thinkers, artists, spiritual seekers, and environmentalists, offering timeless insights into how we might live more freely, harmoniously, and authentically. Zhuangzi's skepticism toward rigid systems, his reverence for nature, and his embrace of spontaneity and transformation provide a much-needed antidote to the stresses and constraints of modern life. In a world increasingly defined by complexity, uncertainty, and environmental crisis, Zhuangzi's thought offers a path of wisdom that encourages us to live in alignment with the natural rhythms of the universe, to let go of control, and to embrace the impermanence and fluidity of existence. As we move forward into an uncertain future, Zhuangzi's teachings remain a beacon of clarity and insight, reminding us that the key to a fulfilling life lies not in our attempts to control or dominate the world around us, but in our willingness to flow with it and to appreciate the beauty of life as it unfolds.